So then next topic is going to be about some of the what I've termed climate, and I'm not talking about the weather climate. I'm talking about the kind of climate in Britain, and it's not just the climate today. It's kind of has quite historical roots. Um, I, as part of my research, this was something I came across, and I sometimes ask people guess the time frame. When was this? I've obviously put it up here, so you can see it's back in 1517. Um, if any of you want to do the maths on this one, that obviously it was very, very long time ago. Um, in fact, over 500 years ago, 508. Um, Basically, 1st of May, 1517, a couple of weeks before actually, there was a gentleman called John Lincoln. He was a trader and a preacher who was known as Dr. Bell, and he'd give sermons, and he gave one particular sermon, and he was talking about how immigrants are stealing our jobs from English workers and eating the bread from poor fatherless children. Um, huge kind of incendiary sermon speeches going on. Um, a lot of it, it was actually more against Flemish cobblers and others. There was a sense of resentment going on. Interestingly, at the time, only 2% of London's population, of around 50,000 people, were foreign born, so less than 1,000 people. Um, and the interesting thing was that it was turned into such a big issue that at the time, um, the riots that happened were actually, um, if you can read the next on May Day next, the city would rebel and slay all aliens. Now, the word slay obviously means obviously kill. Um, that's how kind of horrific the tensions were. And they came quite suddenly. And at the time, Henry VIII took decisive action. He, executed some of them and pardoned some of the others, and really quelled this quite robustly. The swift action was hugely important. Reason I show that up, that this was one of the first documented incidents of xenophobic riots in the UK. Over 500 years ago. And sadly, when we come to today, it's still going on in the UK, and especially right now. So this is why this is so important to understand, and to, especially this segment of this presentation is really important because it kind of shows you some of the challenges. Um, there'll be people out there who'll say, "Oh, well, it's just patriotism. It's just loving the flag. It's a good thing, really." There'll be people saying that. Fair enough. However, a lot of people will say otherwise. And here's which I found really interesting. It was some artists in Manchester who'd kind of did some artwork with the flag. Interestingly, just yesterday I saw a video produced by Gary Neville. He's a famous Manchester United footballer. He lives in Manchester as well, and he's actually got a few businesses there. And he did a little video to say that on one of his properties, he's had it for about 4 years. Somebody put a Union Jack flag on it, and he tore it down. And he explains that, for the last 4 years, nobody felt a need to put the flag up, yet suddenly it was put up. He himself, very patriotic. He's been capped, I think, around 85 times for England, and loves England immensely. But he can see what this is really about. He's played with players across the world. He's got friends from across the world, and he doesn't like what's happening at the moment. So that was really interesting. And what a lot of people also don't realize, and I'll share this now. Next slide, is that it's not just about being patriotic, celebrating the colours and the flag. if you look at these, they've all got a common trait, um, and you can see it in their logos. Almost spot the difference, but it's the Union Jack. It's in all of them, and many people will say how the far right have hijacked the flag, and that's true, and they have done so for many years. When we were talking about earlier, so back in the 60s and 70s, there was a group called the National Front. It became the fourth largest political party in terms, vote share back then. Members are also known as skinheads, quite violent, thuggish, awful behavior, and a lot of, racism suffered by people who are black and Asian during those decades. That then morphed into the British National Party, and they even had quite a few successes, over 50 seats in local government, a seat on the London Assembly, and two European members of the European Parliament. So again, it kind of showed the kind of base of this kind of racism, and how widespread and prevalent it is. And then the BNP kind of became inactive largely. However, before it became inactive, key members of it um, went to create the Britain First Party, and it morphed into that. Um, People do ask, about the Britain First Party and the difference, because as well as the racism, it's also very Islamophobic. There's videos online of them storming mosques. Being cowards they are, they'd kind of go in when there's not many worshippers and confront the one or two people there. They obviously won't take their shoes off. They disrespect, these places of worship, and they'll film these encounters. And it's really sad that they're doing this, especially if you look back just the other day. There was a mosque in Peacehaven in the UK that was firebombed. You know, um, some would describe it as an arson attack, some would describe it as a terror attack, but two men in balaclavas came to firebomb the mosque. It was just after prayer time, so it was locked. There were still two people inside, in their 60s, who just managed to get out, and they'd also, firebombed a car that was outside. There is a direct link between this, the rise of fascism, racism. So to really again understand Black History Month and the impact and the challenges in the UK, it's important to understand the climate and in the correct context, because it's not as easy as, oh, it's just some harmless flags. There's more to it. And again, when it's the World Cup, flags are all out, not an issue. But this is different, and that's why it's important again to understand just how different it is. And when people are, when racists target people, it's not, they don't differentiate between a black or an Asian person that's been born and raised in the UK, studied here, works here, than someone who just, came recently and sought asylum here. They don't distinguish between them. So this is why it's important to, address this. Again, images like this, events like this going on in London, we want our country back. And, you know, there's a lot of this at the moment in society, in workplaces, in place of education. It's quite subtle often. Oh, I'm just flying a flag, just being patriotic, but there's more to it. And I think that's where things aren't quite right. It's sort of legitimizing this as opposed to just a protest. Something I always put up is this. It's so the oldest, because go back to our country, want our country back. Whose country is it anyway? As a race, the human race is a single race. The so this was a gentleman who was found in a cave in the UK. The village was called Cheddar, hence it's called Cheddar Man. The DNA analysis suggested, he'd died over 10,000 years ago. But interestingly, he had dark brown skin and blue eyes. We also know about, the, tectonic plates, the continents, how, many hundreds of, millions of years ago, it was one kind of continent and it split up. So that was quite interesting as well. That the oldest known kind of living person in the UK was dark brown skinned. Um, One of the other interesting facts and kind of the myth busting that's needed is around St. George in particular. Um, he's obviously much veneered patron saint of the UK and several other of England and sorry several other countries as well. But what a lot of people don't realise was he was himself born in Cappadocia, which is in modern day Turkey. His mother, interestingly, was born in what was became known as Palestine, um, and is believed to be of Syrian Cappadocian origin. So just looking at that, you got Turkey, Palestine, Syria. Now, again, that's kind of a thing that a lot of people don't realise that the patron saint of England himself was foreign. In fact, it's not believed he even came to the UK or England ever. Um, he's also highly respected by Christians, Druze, as well as Muslims, and that's something that's also forgotten about. The St. George flag also itself was adopted by England and the City of London in 1190, and that's for their ships entering the Mediterranean for the protection of the Genoese fleet. In Genoa, again, they kind of veneer St. George as well, and that's how it kind of came about. And it's quite interesting because in the current say migration policies, St. George wouldn't be able to come to England. His parents couldn't come. They wouldn't be able to come to England easily, and it's kind of interesting, really, when you think about it. But it's also important to challenge these notions and facts, and actually, embracing globalization and others is actually really important. And it goes back to again the point of xenophobia, us and them. Who are we really? Who really are they? Because we're all kind of the human race. So a lot of education is required, and I'll touch upon that in the latter sections of this session.